We'll call the meeting to order. And do I have a motion to approve the previous minutes? Do you have the date of the previous minutes there, Jim?
Yeah, I have a correction on those minutes.
Okay.
My name is not Harry.
I'll let John know.
I'm not a prince.
Okay.
All right. Okay.
Oh, boy.
I will let John know that. Otherwise, any other, what's the date? What's the date on that? You want to say the date on the minutes you want to correct there, Hank?
Let me check just a second.
It was June 6th.
I have it here. Yes,
So is it the
June
June
16th. June
Okay.
16th. Yes.
Okay, so the correction is to your name on the June 16th minutes. Otherwise, do we have any other problems with the minutes?
No.
Okay, so you want to move to accept the minutes from June 16th as corrected?
Also move.
Okay, second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, John, so we just moved to correct, good morning. We just moved to correct Hank's name from on the June 16th minutes to Hank instead of Harry, or Henry instead of Harry. Otherwise, we accepted the minutes. Can you hear us? We don't hear you.
Okay, I'm
Oh,
unmuted.
now we got you. Now we got you. Okay, good. Okay, so Jim, do you want to just do the usual advertisement about the fact that this is being recorded?
Yeah, it's September 16th, 2022, Town of Stockbridge Board of Health meeting. It's in person with a hybrid option, and according to Mass General Law, it's being recorded and it'll be uploaded to CTSB at the conclusion of the meeting.
Okay, thank you. And so we have citizen speak time next on the agenda. I don't see any citizens participating here. Does anybody see that?
I don't.
No, okay. All right, so we'll move along then. So I actually wanted to review the cyanobacteria policies and procedures. That's one of the reasons I wanted to have this meeting at this point. The basic idea is that the general procedure, as I understand it, is a state mandated procedure. And the state gives us the directions about what to do if we suspect a cyanobacteria bloom. Jim, do you want to review that and just go over it so we're all on the same page?
Yeah.
of what the procedure is?
Yeah, and I apologize to the entire board. In hindsight, I probably should have scanned all these documents and sent them to you ahead of time. In my mind, I thought we were all meeting in person. So there's documents I'm going to reference that Hank and John, you probably don't have sitting in front of you. The two large attachments I did send yesterday that Charlie asked me to forward, but there's some other documents, but at the conclusion of the meeting, I'll scan the entire packet and then I'll send it along to you. So there's a lot of information regarding cyanobacteria, but one of the first documents I'll reference for the meeting is the Commonwealth of Massachusetts Executive Office of Health and Human Services under Department of Public Health, Bureau of Environmental Health. And it's a document called the Mass DPH Guidelines for Cyanobacteria in Freshwater Recreational Water Bodies in Massachusetts. And it's about it's 11-page document, which we came across back when we had the original bloom. And it talks about the introduction, background, review of literature. But within that document, it talks about the protocols responsible for local boards of health. So basically, within that document, basically, there are three measures in which action can be taken. One, observation of a visible scum or mat layer. Two, total cell count of cyanobacteria units of total cells per milliliters of water, and a concentration of cyanobacteria toxin. And so number one is if we get a request that there's a potential algae bloom, our role and responsibility for the health department through the Board of Health Authority is we investigate it. And we just make a determination on whether it's an algae bloom. And just based on the visible scum layer alone, no other testing is actually needed prior to issuing an advisory. Now, when we look back, when we had the bowl bloom, it was something new to a lot of us. And at that time, there was a lot of confusion, because something was put in the Eagle that was not exactly what was happening. Dr. Kenny and I got involved, and DP was involved somehow, DPH was involved. There was all these state agencies involved. But what had happened was they actually came out and helped us test before we issued the advisory. That was sort of like a misnomer. Going forward, the actual protocol is the visible scum all by itself is the determination we take to issue the advisory. What happens after that, once it dissipates, then the Department of Public Health through their environmental team will come out and actually sample and then provide those sample results to us to make sure it's under the threshold. But there's a lot of information in here about that. So, I mean, I don't know how much deeper you want to get into the actual protocol, but that's typically what we do. We issue the advisory. Once it dissipates, sampling's conducted. 2 consecutive weeks, it's got to be below a certain threshold, and then we remove the advisory. That's sort of like the short synopsis of how we handle a bloom.
Okay, so let me just clarify one point you made there, Jim. Are you saying that the state ordinarily will not come out to test the water while the scum is still visible?
No, because if we recall, when we went back when we dealt with the original bowl issue, it's an automatic assumption that it's going to exceed the toxin count when the scum is present. That's why they don't test.
Okay, so all right, so that's a procedural thing. All right, if what I'd like to do is just based on that same general set of procedures that the state has outlined for us, I'd like to just go down some of the procedures and give you my understanding, of the rationale behind the various steps that that make this happen like that. So first of all, just to summarize what Jim was saying pretty simply, the trigger for issuing an advisory is basically someone's complained or reported to us that they think there's a cyanobacteria bloom, and we go to observe the sign of it, which is the visible scum. And that's something that I think the only way you can get to be familiar with that is to actually go and see it. I've been to a couple of places where the state is, certified that these were, cyanobacteria, and saw our own version of it. There are different kinds of cyanobacteria. Typically, they used to be called blue-green algae because the scum has a kind of bluish green appearance to it with a lot of the different kinds. But on the Stockbridge bowl, the major cyanobacteria that's been here for at least through the testing that we've been doing is Oscillatoria. Now, John, did you get a chance to look at the most recent testing results?
I did not see the most recent testing results, no.
Okay, well, heretofore, it's almost always been oscillatory. In fact, as far as I can recall, there were no testing that showed anything except very small amounts of microcystis or anabina or something like that. It's always oscillatoria. Now, oscillatoria has a kind of reddish scum on it, so that the scum may appear to be a reddish color, because I think this is based on iron compound present in the oscillatoria. So we have different kinds of scums, but once we're asked to go to see this, and if we can confirm that this is a scum that is potentially a cyanobacteria, and I'm saying potentially because I don't think we can be absolutely certain when we just look at it visually that it is, but if we think that it's potentially a scum, then we would have a Board of Health meeting. It would be an emergency meeting. I would ask for the meeting, and we would discuss it. And I think probably on the basis of there being a visible scum and the recommendations of the state procedures here, we would say that we should issue an advisory. And I think we would put out that advisory. Now, once we had that advisory, there's an option you have to report this to the state. Jim, do you do that through the Tri-Town?
Yeah, what we would do is upon the conclusion of the board vote, we would make sure we get the signage to all locations around the bowl, camps, boat launch,
saying that this is an advisory. Now, we don't have any penalties for people going in the water.
no, it's an advisory. It's
We're just
not,
telling people that there's a potential hazard there. And the word potential is the operative word because we're always looking at that kind of an idea. And, but the Tri-Town would put in place these warning notifications, and also you'll notify the state.
yeah, DEP and probably DPH we would do.
Now, in the past, the other part of this is if you can recall that the cyanobacteria are single-celled organisms, and they contain the toxin within the cell. And when the cells are alive, and all of them are alive, and none of them have died, there may not be any toxin in the water at all. Similarly, if you can understand that the cyanobacteria very frequently exist at very low levels at the thermocline, down about 30 or 40 feet on the Stockbridge wall, and that's where oscillatoria has typically been, the place where the warm water abruptly changes to cold water. That's where they sit. And they have the potential themselves to levitate, to go higher and come to the surface. They typically do that. Oscillatoria is a kind of it's sort of a friendly cyanobacteria from that point of view, because it typically of its own comes to the surface when it's pretty cold. It even is known to come, Cortman tells us that it comes under the ice in the wintertime. So it doesn't give us the kind of problems, let's say, that Anabina or Microcystis would of rising to the surface, let's say, during the summertime so much. I don't know what Pontusic Lake's organism is. Do you know what it is? They recently had a bloom, but I bet it is an oscillatoria. I bet it's probably one of these others. But be that as it may, when they come to the surface, the colonies come to the surface, the wind can blow them. And it typically does up to the edge of the lake. So you'll find the bloom, you'll find the scum near the edge of the lake typically, although it might be somewhere else initially. The wind will blow it to a place. They might come up over here, the wind blows it over here. What that means is there's a geographical potential. If some of the cyanobacteria have died en route to this place where we find them on the edge of the lake, but there may be toxin in the water over here that isn't blown. And meanwhile, we have the cyanobacteria in the other place. And if you test near it, there's no toxin. Now, one of the testing procedures for the cyanobacteria is to hydrolyze the cells. I think they use ultrasound or something. And then they determine whether the cyanobacteria are toxic, because not all cyanobacteria actually have toxins in them. That step comes about a week later, right, Jim? They'll come out about a week later and do that particular test. Or as Jim was saying, maybe I'm wrong about that. They may wait until the bloom is no longer visible to come out, that which I think is probably the way they would do it now. So they don't do, all we do is maintain the advisory every week. We check it on a regular basis, and we let the state know when the scum is gone or significantly dissipated. Then they would come out presumably and test the water and also pull some of the cyanobacteria and actually look at them and tell us what kind of species they are of cyanobacteria and test the water. And they do that again on a weekly basis until the toxin level is below about 50 micrograms per ml, correct? Or is it 70?
Bear with me. Well, if it exceeds 70,000 cells per milliliter, or a concentration of toxic mycocystins exceeds 8 micrograms per liter, or a concentration of a toxin exceeds 15.
15. Okay, so for the various toxins, they'll look at different kinds of levels of the toxin. They're micrograms, 8 or 15. The cells are 70,000 that they're looking for as a way to continue. So even if you don't see the scum anymore, but if they find 70,000 cells per milliliter in the sample, or if they find a toxin level, depending on the toxin that exceeds their standard, they're going to recommend to us that we continue the advisory for another week. And they'll repeat this on a weekly basis until the cell count is below 70,000. First of all, the scum is already gone, but until the cell count is below 70,000 and until the the toxin level is acceptable. So that's the state testing procedure.
But 2 consecutive weeks of the test below. So if the first week is above, then they go out the second week, it's below, it's 2, so it'd be a third week of testing.
So they'll repeat it. If they get a negative sample, they'll repeat it. And understanding that the sampling, has a potential error, a geographic error. You put the sampling error thing in a place where the annabeta or where the cyanobacteria have blown to just recently, there may not be any toxin in that water. It may have come from some other place where they weren't. It might have blown around a little bit. So they repeat it a week later. And if we have 2 negative weeks, then we can lift the advisory. So now.
Question for you, Charlie.
Sure.
If the testing is positive, does the warning become greater than advisory, or does it just remain advisory?
No, we don't do anything more than an advisory. We continue the advisory. The Board of Health does not intercede in a way that's prohibitive. We just are advisory in this capacity, and we just continue the advisory. And people can do what they want. They can go underwater if they want to, and they can do that. But I think Jim doesn't try to also mention that pets are vulnerable.
Pets, swimming.
Children, the smaller the person or the animal, the more vulnerable they are to getting pretty sick from these things. And these toxins can have neurological consequences, dermatological consequences, and they can have gastrointestinal consequences. Depending on whether you've inhaled them, they can have pulmonary consequences. If you swallow it, you get the GI stuff, and the neurotoxic stuff for some of them is pretty severe. But I think in general, what we'll do is we'll simply advise people not to do anything. We can't step in. I think we lost John temporarily there.
Yeah, and I'll see if we can come back, but it's sort of impractical to enforce something of that magnitude. You know what I mean? Like you're going to staff every entrance to the bowl and start issuing tickets.
Well, that's not our mandate anyway. We're not supposed to do it. So we don't stop. All right. So that's the procedure. Now, the only other thing here that I think is important to be discussed, and I actually was hoping that John could participate in this. I don't know if he'll be able to get back with us, but it's my opinion that Jim was telling me earlier that the state will do this, but there's a contingency related to possible funding or let's say the possibility that funding won't be there, they won't be able to do it. So if that's the case, I think we should have some sort of backup plan in place. And what I'd like to suggest is that we ask Cortman and his group. We can talk to the select board about this, or we could simply ask them ourselves. But I think going through the select board is probably the way to go, to ask them to have Cortman's group. That's the GZA group that currently tests the Stockbridge bowl on a regular basis for a lot of different things that are related to cyanobacteria, but not just that. And to have them possibly become a backup system so that if the state, for some reason, doesn't have the funding that Jim is saying that they said they might not have, that we could have a backup to do that. So we're not left with, scrambling at the last minute.
Yes. And I did speak to Hank, to DPH the other day, the toxicology program, because, pre-pandemic, they had plenty of staff. And I wasn't sure where DPH was at coming out of the pandemic, because they made a lot of cutbacks and stuff and lost a lot of staff. So he basically told me it's a state budget appropriation, and he feels pretty confident over the next couple of years that they'll have the funding available to test for cyanobacteria blooms across the Commonwealth. But the caveat being it's contingent upon appropriation of funding on an annual basis. And so one of my thoughts to Dr. Kenny was well, maybe we ask Cortman through the select board approval just to have them as a backup plan, or they don't respond appropriately in a manner that we feel that they need to.
For some reason, we feel like we need to have some assistance with this beyond what the state is able to give us. I would like to have a backup plan so we can continue with, either continue with the advisory or lift it and rescind it in an appropriate way and not be not knowing what to do or have our thing. So can I have a motion to to accept that idea, that we ask the select board to get a backup testing. I'm going to suggest Cortman's group because I think that's logical, but I would leave it up to them to decide, but we could have some input on it to just to back up the state should they not be able to perform the way we were hoping that we need them to do what we need to do.
Well, I'll move that we do go ahead with a backup plan for cyanobacteria testing, just as you described.
Thank you, Hank. I second that. Can we have a roll call vote on that?
Aye.
All right, so Dr. Schwerner says yes, and I, Charles Kenny, say yes as well. So we have a majority vote here. John Lidici is no longer with us electronically, but we still have a quorum, so this will pass. Okay, so that's the cyanobacteria issue at the present time. The next agenda item is a follow-up on the Marian Fathers mental health community conversation. We had that. John, just to bring you up in speed, we did vote to have a backup, to ask the select board to do a backup plan to have Cortman and his group or somebody back up the state if they're not able to do what we need them to do those procedures because of funding or something else. And so we just passed that.
So how will we know that the state is not willing or unable to do it? Will they let us know when we ask them? Is that how it works?
Well, I would imagine that this would occur at the moment. You know, it'll be something that we find out at that time. Maybe we'll be advised ahead of time. I think that the motion that we just passed allows for both of those options. You know, that if we present it to the select board relatively soon, so we get it in place.
But basically, John, I spoke to DPH because pre-pandemic, they had all the resources to come out and do the testing to lift advisories, and I wasn't sure where they were at, you know, post-pandemic. So I called them the other day prior to this meeting and asked them if they have the resources to come out and help municipalities if and when there's a bloom to make sure sampling is done. And he basically said, for now, they have budget appropriations to do that. But again, it's always contingent upon the state budget being appropriated. So my idea to Dr. Kenny before our meeting was like, maybe we asked this, you know, through the select board to have a backup plan in case one day we get a bloom and they say, oh, geez, we don't have the funding anymore. It puts us in a really precarious position. And having a backup plan will kind of cross our T and dot our I. So Hank and Charlie made a motion to, you know, ask the select board for that backup.
I have a little unstable connection. I apologize for my brief absence, but I think we're good.
Well, I hope you don't mind us voting in your absence.
No, absolutely not. I would have agreed to that. Yeah.
Okay, so the next item on the agenda is a follow-up of the Marian Fathers Mental Health community conversation that we had this summer that was very successful. And I've been asked by the Austin Riggs group, they thought this was a successful thing, to put together the same group of people that was organized this in the first place to see if we want to do any kind of follow-up. We haven't had that second meeting yet or any kind of organizational element. And my feeling is, based on what the Riggs people told me, is they thought it was that we had sort of scratched the surface and that we really, but that they saw that this was going in the right direction. They would be very willing to participate again. I don't know if you remember Ed Shapiro from Austin Riggs actually led that group, and it was a pretty revealing and actually cathartic experience for some people, I think. So my recommendation is that it's going to be to this group that we think about doing it again, or doing something that might be more helpful, or doing something that we would be able to allow this to go on by itself, not necessarily having the Board of Health involved all the time. Do you guys have any kind of input for this? Anything you want to say about it?
No, but I agree with you that if we've only scratched the surface, it probably is important that we continue this.
Okay, good. I'll bring that to the attention of the organizers of it when we do meet. I expect to have that meeting within the next couple of weeks. You know, I was waiting till after Labor Day vacations and all that other kind of thing. Okay, so the next item on the agenda is food service violations. Jim, do you want to report on that?
No, I think we had some outstanding issues that are since resolved. I was anticipating being that on the agenda for the Board of Health, but you can just table that, move on.
Okay. Tri-Town health updates. You want to give
Sure.
us those, Jim?
Yeah, and I'll forward to you guys the updated COVID numbers. Again, you know, we still do the dashboard, but we're probably going to be pulling back those COVID dashboards because we're flu season and booster seasons in high demand right now. For the week of September 4th to the 10th, we have 6 open COVID cases in the town of Stockbridge. Really, I mean, we're still monitoring COVID and the nurses are still actively committed to contact tracing the over 65 plus population in the school age children. The state did pull back a lot of the contact tracing requirements, but the nurses are in Maven every day and they're monitoring the COVID cases. And again, I think we just have to live with COVID, and that kind of gets me into the segue. The nurses, this is regarding to the 12-town collaborative that Tri-Town is leading and part of. We have a robust flu vaccine clinic schedule, which includes homebounds, as well as doing COVID boosters. I was hoping to present that final schedule today, but there's some last minute tweaks. Once that schedule is finalized, we'll send that out. But right now we're going to be doing something at Town Hall, and we're going to be doing something at Heaton Court, which will offer the flu and the COVID booster at the same time. And we're rolling out a homebound vaccine program for those that are homebound and can't get access to clinics. But once that schedule is completed, I will forward that. Other updates, there is a Smash the Stigma event happening tomorrow, September 17th. I think it is tomorrow. September 17th from 12 to 3, Town Hall Park, Great Barrington. For those that are on the road to recovery, we work very closely with the Rural Recovery Center out of Great Barrington. It's a brick and mortar building that it's now placed in Great Barrington, but serves all of South County with regard to substance use and disorder. Any other updates that I have?
You mentioned something to me about polio, and we were looking at.
Yeah. So Charlie and I, we've been following, and Dr. Schwerner sent a link this morning to John and Charlie regarding some polio stuff. But we're trying to keep an eye on what's happening in New York and what's happening in Connecticut. And it's not on the agenda today, but I think I'll ask the board to maybe make a motion and put this on as an active agenda item for the next meeting, but it's something, shouldn't be overly concerned yet, but I think it's on the radar that we need to keep our eyes and ears peeled related to this polio situation.
Hank, I know you were a pediatrician and you've been looking at the polio thing. Do you have anything to say about whether we should put this on the agenda coming up?
Well, I think we should have this on the agenda, and until we see that it's sort of been eradicated again, as it probably will be in time, I think we should just keep our eyes on it. I did send out an article to all three of you this morning that is about the best summary that I found about what's going on with polio right now and why, and immunizations that should be done, and the 2 vaccines, et cetera, just as a general way of looking at it. So if you can go through that, that'd be great for the next meeting.
Okay, good. So Henry, will you stay on top of that then and let me know if you think we should do something urgently or whether we can just do it in a routine way? Okay, right now.
At this point, it's, do things in a routine way
Okay.
for our population.
Okay, good. All right.
And I did have one more thing, if you don't mind, Mr. Chair. We're about ready for a quarterly Tri-Town meeting, which is the 3 boards meeting together. We're a little bit behind because one of the things that I want to put on the agenda for the next Tri-Town meeting is Tri-Town discussion related to the upland disposal facility. in Lee. But Lee Board of Health is tackling a separate issue under the Lee Board of Health, dealing with possible litigation strategies. And I wanted to see where that plays out first before we convene the next Tri-Town meeting, so we can, so the people from Lee can give the full Tri-Town board an update on where they stand related to the PCB dump. So we're a little bit behind, but I hope to meet in early to mid-October for our next quarterly meeting.
Okay, well, just to make sure that I understand the segue there, that doesn't relate specifically to what Dr. Schwerner was saying about making the polio agenda item coming up in the
Yeah,
future
yeah.
being routine, right?
No, right, but we're still under
You're not
announcements.
suggesting that he put that under the Tri-Town,
We
right?
could, yeah, I mean, it's not just a Stockbridge issue. I think we could put it on
I'll leave
the,
that up to you, Henry, depending on
Yeah,
what.
I do think it's a community issue. It's not just Stockbridge. It's the whole general area that we have to sort of watch for.
John, do you have any other opinion about that, about putting it on the agenda for
I think,
Tri-Town?
yeah, I agree. We should put it on the Tri-Town rather than just the Stockbridge. I agree.
Okay. All right, so the next item here, you've already covered the COVID updates. Do we have any other agenda items here? I don't see any.
no.
No? Anything I missed?
Any future agenda items we need to think about for the next Stockbridge meeting we should be considering?
Well, always,
We got it pretty well covered.
all right, feel free to let me know if you think there are any agenda items. And
Okay.
again, Henry, if you think that this polio situation becomes an urgent thing, then we will put it on the agenda for for a discussion on an urgent basis. Just let me know, okay? All right.
Okay, I will do
Okay,
that.
so can I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Okay, thank you for coming, you guys. Have a nice day.